Complete Philosophy of Boethius, a sleep essay from Vesperal Books. It is late, and there is nowhere else you need to be. Whatever the day asked of you, it has finished asking. This hour belongs to no one, and you may spend it exactly as you are, eyes closed, half listening, letting these words come and go like slow traffic on a far road. Tonight, I want to tell you about a book, and about the man who wrote it. Nothing here needs to be remembered. There is no test at the end, no thread you are required to hold. If you drift, the story will carry on quietly without you, and it will still be here tomorrow night, unchanged. 15 centuries ago, in a prison cell in Italy, a Roman senator sat waiting to be executed for a crime he swore he had not committed. He had been, by almost every measure his world knew, a fortunate man, and he had lost all of it in a single season. Far from his family and his library, with no court left that would hear him, he did a strange and gentle thing. He began to write a book about happiness. The book is called The Consolation of Philosophy, and for the next 1,000 years it was copied, translated, and loved as few books have ever been. It is the book that taught Europe how to suffer well. The complete work, read unabridged, is here on this channel whenever you want it. Tonight, there is nothing to do at all. We will simply keep the man company and let his ideas pass over us slowly, one at a time, in the dark. Chapter 1. The Man Who Had Everything. It begins with a room. It is a library in a great house in Rome, and the man to whom this story belongs will remember it from very far away as the best room of his life. In the book he wrote at the end of that life, the room is recalled in passing, in the words of his translator, as the library walls set off with glass and ivory. Glass to let the light fall kindly on the shelves, and ivory because nothing in that house was ever plain. And there were books on every side, Greek beside Latin, and the books mattered to him more than the glass and the ivory put together. His name was Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius, and history has mostly kept only the last of those names. He was born around the year 477 into the senatorial aristocracy of Rome, which is to say, into a city that had, in a sense, outlived its own empire. That is worth resting on for a moment, because it is the strangest fact of his world. Rome still stood. The Senate still met. The old families still kept their houses and their ceremonies and their pride. But there was no longer any emperor in the West. Italy was ruled by a Gothic king, and for the whole of Boethius's grown life, that king was Theodoric the Ostrogoth, who ruled it not from Rome, but from Ravenna. A Roman boy of that generation grew up inside a shell that was still beautiful, still warm, and no longer the center of anything. Boethius was orphaned young. A child of that rank could not simply be lost, and he was not. He was taken into the household of the senator Symmachus and raised there, among that family's books and that family's friends, and whatever grief the boy carried in with him, the house seems to have answered it, because he loved Symmachus for the rest of his life. At the very end of it, in the book written in his cell, he still pauses to praise the man, a father-in-law revered for the purity of his character and for the good he did with his standing in the world. Father-in-law, I said, because the story folded over on itself in the kindest way. When Boethius grew up, he married Rusticiana, Symmachus's own daughter. The man who had taken in an orphan became his father twice over, first by kindness and then by law, and the house that had sheltered a grieving boy became, simply and permanently, his family. In time there were children, 2 sons, and we will come to them, because they stand at the very summit of this chapter of his life. But first, there is the matter of what the boy did with all those books. He learned Greek, and learned it deeply, and that made him a rare kind of man, because the West of his day was quietly losing its Greek. Fewer and fewer educated Romans could still read the language that philosophy had been thought in, the language of Plato and of Aristotle, and the old bridge between Greek thought and Latin speech was coming down plank by plank with no one repairing it. Boethius saw this clearly, and he set himself a task of almost absurd scale. He would translate the works of Plato and the works of Aristotle into Latin, all of them, and more than translate them. He would reconcile them, showing that the 2 great philosophers were, at bottom, more in harmony than in quarrel. It was a project meant to carry the whole mind of Greece safely across into the coming Latin centuries. The book he would one day write remembers the scholar he had been in a song, in the words of his translator. Yet once he ranged the open heavens, the sun's bright pathway tracked, watched how the cold moon waxed and waned. The same song remembers him hunting the causes of things, why the winds trouble the quiet face of the sea, what tempers the mild hours of spring so that the earth is garlanded with roses, why the sun rises out of the east and runs its even race into the western waves. He wanted, it says, no star left out of his account of the sky. That was the shape of his curiosity, not a specialty, but everything, the whole furnished universe, studied from a chair in a library in Rome. And philosophy for him was never merely the name of a subject. In his book, he pictures it as a living companion, a presence that had kept him company since boyhood, and when he remembers that library, he remembers it as a shared room, in his own words, the place where we so often sat together and held discourse of all things in heaven and earth. It is the sentence of a man for whom thinking was never solitude but company, the least lonely thing he knew how to do. A man like that might have stayed in his library forever. He did not, and he tells us why. He carried with him a saying of Plato, which he quotes in his book, that states would be happy if philosophers ruled them, or if the men who ruled them turned to philosophy. And beside it, he carried Plato's warning that when government is left to the unprincipled, ruin comes upon the good. He took both to heart. The scholar folded up his manuscripts and went to court, resolving to bring into public life the principles he had learned in quiet study. The offices came in their season. In the year 510, Boethius was made consul. For a family like his, that word was the old dream. Whatever had become of the empire, The consulship still meant that Rome had looked at one of its sons and called him first among its own. And Theodoric drew him closer still, making him master of offices at the court in Ravenna, a title that tells you, even at this distance, how near to the king's business he stood. The philosopher who had wanted no star missing from his heavens now had the administration of a kingdom passing across his desk. Then came the day he would keep above all the others. In the year 522, his 2 sons were made consuls, joint consuls, the pair of them together for the same year. We are told it was the proudest day of his life, and it is not hard to believe. His own honors he had earned, and perhaps discounted, the way we discount whatever we have worked for. But to stand aside and watch both of his boys raised at once to that old dignity, that was fortune exceeding anything a man plans. It was the kind of day that feels less like an event than like a verdict. The world announcing that this life, of all lives, had been built correctly. You can add it up slowly if you like, the way one counts quiet things at night. An old name, a great house, the guardian who became a father, the marriage that made the kindness permanent, the learning and the library and a life's project large enough to hold a whole life, the consulship, the king's trust, and at the crown of it all, 2 sons honored together while their father watched. His friends looked at all this and called him happy, and years later, at the very bottom of his fall, he remembered how lightly they had said it. It is there in the first song of the Consolation, in the words of his translator. Friends, why did ye once so lightly vaunt me happy among men? Surely he who so hath fallen was not firmly founded then. Notice what that sentence does, because the whole book is folded inside it. It does not say the happiness was false, or that the friends were lying. It asks whether the happiness was founded, whether it rested on anything that could bear weight, and it observes, very quietly, that a thing which fell so far must not have been standing on much. No one asks that question in the good years. In the good years, what we have does not feel like a loan. It feels like a limb. So we will leave him there for a little while, in the bright years, a man standing in his library with the light on the shelves and every good thing still in its place. What came next will keep until you are ready for it, and it would wait all night if you asked it to. Nothing in that bright room needs him yet, and nothing anywhere, just now, needs you. Chapter 2. The Fall. Of all the rooms in this story, the one to notice next is a room the man himself never entered. Somewhere in it, a case was read out against him, and the place where the accused would stand and answer stood empty, because he was hundreds of miles away and had not been summoned. Every fall in this chapter arrives, in the end, at that vacant spot on the floor. It is worth keeping in the corner of your eye. He had made enemies, and he tells us exactly how. In the book, he reminds philosophy of his record, the way a tired man empties his pockets at the end of a long day, item by item. There was Conigastus, a powerful figure at court, who liked to swoop on the fortunes of the weak, and Boethius says he blocked him over and over. There was Triguilla, steward of the king's household, whose schemes Boethius says he overturned even when they were all but complete. There were the helpless people forever being harassed with false charges by the greedy, and he says he risked his own standing to shelter them, and was never once bent away from justice. He remembered Campania, when scarcity was abroad, and a forced sale of grain had been proclaimed, a measure he calls ruinous and indefensible, one that threatened the province with starvation. He fought it, he says, before the king himself, and won. The sale was not enforced. He remembered Paulinus, a man of consular rank, whose wealth the hungriest men at court had already swallowed in their hopes. Boethius pulled him back out of their mouths. Each rescue was a debt somebody powerful now owed him, and none of those debts was the kind that is repaid in gratitude. Then came Albinus. He was a senator, and he was accused of treasonous correspondence, letters passing between him and the Eastern court in Constantinople, where an emperor still reigned. To a Gothic king in Ravenna, letters to Constantinople could be made to look like the darkest thing in the world. Boethius says the charge had been judged, in effect, before it was heard, and he stepped in front of it. He defended Albinus, and by defending him, he drew onto himself the hatred of Cyprian, the informer who had brought the charge. You can feel the mechanism turning already. A man who blocks an informer once is an obstacle. The accusation, finding him in the way, simply widened to include him. The defender became the defendant. And who were the accusers? He names them from his cell, and the names have stayed named for 15 centuries. Basil, dismissed from the king's household and pressed by his debts, Boethius says, into the work of informing against him. Opilio and Gaudentius, men already condemned by the king to banishment for offences of many kinds. They had taken sanctuary rather than go, and when the king heard of it, he decreed that if they did not leave Ravenna by the appointed day, they would be branded on the forehead and driven out. On that very day, Boethius tells us, with that sentence hanging over them, their information against him was received and admitted. He asks the obvious thing, the thing you would ask. Has fortune no shame? If not at the accusation of the innocent, then at least at the vileness of the accusers. You need not keep any of these names, by the way. They can file past like strangers at the far end of a dark street, and nothing will be lost. What then was the charge? He gives the sum of it in a single line, and the translator renders it plainly. I wished, they say, to save the Senate. He was accused of hindering an informer, of standing in the way of evidence meant to prove the Senate guilty of treason. And here he does the thing that tells you, more than any list of offices, who this man was. Deny it, and the denial would shame the philosophy he had lived by. Admit it, and the case was closed. He does not hesitate. But I did wish it, and I shall never cease to wish it. There were forged letters too, he says, made to show that he had hoped for the freedom of Rome, and their falsity would have been plain if he had been allowed to bring the informer's own confessions into the light. He was not allowed. He even permits himself one dry joke about hope, remembering the philosopher Cainius, who, accused by the Emperor Caligula of knowing about a conspiracy, answered that if he had known of it, Caligula never would have. The Senate he had wished to save condemned him. He was not present. He was never present. By his own account, he had earned better from that body than anyone alive, for he remembered how, at Verona, when the king was bent on spreading the charge of treason from Albinus across the whole senatorial order, he had stood up at open risk to himself and defended the innocence of every one of its members. The body he had shielded at his own risk now sentenced him in his absence, and he sums up his situation in a line the translator gives with terrible quietness. Condemned to outlawry and death, unheard and undefended, at a distance of near 500 miles away. Had he been accused of burning temples or slaughtering priests, he observes, he would at least have been produced in court and punished only on confession or conviction. And after the sentence came the quieter penalty, the one that follows the condemned around like a shadow. People believe verdicts. He watched his own good name turn over in the public mouth, and he set down what he had learned in a sentence the translator renders this way. The most crushing of misfortune's burdens is that as soon as a charge is fastened upon the unhappy, they are believed to have deserved their sufferings. Everything the story counted up a little while ago was gone. The offices, the standing, the name, and in place of them stood a conviction he had never been given 1 hour in one room to answer. They held him at Pavia. The ending is known, and there is no need to hurry toward it or to linger on it. He was executed around the year 524 on the sentence he had never been allowed to contest, and history does not soften any of it. What matters tonight is not the ending. What matters is the waiting and the silence inside it, because it was in the waiting that the strange thing happened. A man in that position has a handful of doors, and most of them are the ones you would expect: rage or numbness, or bargaining with the powerful, letters and petitions and hope. Boethius tells us he did write a plain account of the whole affair, so that the truth of it should not be hidden from posterity. That document would have been the reasonable monument, but it is not what the world remembers him for. In the cell at Pavia, stripped of the library, the offices, and the future, he began something else entirely, a book in the form of a conversation, prose giving way to verse, and verse returning to prose, between a broken man lying in that very cell and a visitor who comes to him there. He gave the visitor a name and a face, and we will meet her soon enough. He called the book a consolation. It does not begin bravely, and this may be the most trustworthy thing about it. It begins in tears. The first page is a poem of plain grief, a man looking at himself in astonishment, white hair come before its time, the skin hanging loose on a frame shrunken by sorrow. And death, he complains, now refusing to come when it is wanted, though it had all but taken him once, in the years when life was sweet. He does not pretend to be above what has happened to him. He starts exactly where anyone starts, at the bottom, in the dark, in self-pity, and the whole book is simply the record of how he was walked up and out of that place, one step at a time. So this is where the fall sets him down. A condemned man, a lamp, a pen moving in the quiet. Every man who accused him has been dust for the better part of 15 centuries, and the book he wrote in that room is still being read to you tonight. There is no need to grieve for him yet, and no need to do anything at all. The pen is moving, the night is long, and help, though he does not know it yet, is very near. Chapter 3. The Visitor. The book itself opens in the cell at night. A man lies on his bed, weeping, and he is writing poetry about his own unhappiness. He imagines the old muses of poetry gathered around him, the same figures who had presided over the verses of his youth, standing at the bedside now like professional mourners, dictating his laments to him, keeping the grief in meter. It is a very human scene. When we are hurt, we compose the hurt. We tell ourselves the story of our own sorrow again and again, polishing it, and each polish sinks it a little deeper. That is what he is doing when the light changes. Above his head, he says, there appeared a woman. Her face was venerable beyond description, and her eyes, in the translator's words, were bright as fire and of a more than human keenness. She was old, plainly older than any living person, and yet nothing about her was feeble. Her color was fresh and her vigor whole, as though her years were of some other kind than ours. Her height would not stay still. At one moment she was no taller than anyone. At the next, her head seemed to touch the sky, and when she lifted it higher still, it pierced beyond the sky altogether, and the eyes that tried to follow her simply gave up. Whoever this was, she did not fit inside the room, and she did not entirely fit inside the world. Her robe is worth a moment of slow attention, because he describes it stitch by stitch. It was woven, she later assured him, by her own hands, of a fabric that does not perish. But it had gone dim with age and neglect, the way marble grows dingy when it stands out in the weather. On its lowest hem was woven a Greek letter, and on its topmost edge another, and between the two ran steps, like a staircase, climbing from the lower letter to the higher one. It was a garment, in other words, with a ground floor and an upper story and a way between them. A dress a person could climb. And the robe was torn. Violent hands had been at it, and each had ripped away whatever scrap it could clutch, and carried the scrap off. In her right hand she held a little book, in her left a staff. Then she noticed the muses at the bedside, dictating, and her eyes flashed. Who, she demands, has allowed these theatrical creatures near a sick man? These are the ones who, in the words of his translator, so far from giving medicine to heal his malady, even feed it with sweet poison. They choke the harvest of reason, she says, and instead of freeing a suffering mind, they teach it to dwell in its suffering. If they were seducing some ordinary man, she would let it pass. But this is one of her own, a mind raised on the philosophies of Greece. Away with these sirens, she tells them, whose sweetness does not last. He is to be left to her own muses, to be tended and healed. And the poor muses of poetry blush, lower their eyes, and files sadly out of the cell. The scene is easy to misread. She is not banishing song itself. The book she has just walked into alternates prose with poetry all the way through, and nearly the first thing she herself does, once the room is cleared, is sing. Sitting on the edge of his bed, she laments over him in verse, a low song about a mind sunk toward the outer dark, about a man who once tracked the sun and the stars, and now lies staring at the dull earth. What she has thrown out is not poetry, but a use of poetry, the sweet kind that feeds the wound to keep it company. Her songs are of the other kind. Hers are part of the treatment. As for the patient, he cannot speak at all. He stares at this towering figure and does not know her. She looks at him and is not alarmed in the least. This, she says, is lethargy, the common sickness of minds that have been deceived. He has forgotten himself for a while. He will easily remember, she says, as soon as he remembers her. And with that, she gathers a fold of her robe, the imperishable fabric she wove with her own hands, and gently dries his eyes. There is a song just there about night scattering, about a wind that rolls the rain clouds away so that the sun breaks out suddenly and strikes the dazzled eyes. That is what it feels like from inside, he tells us. The fog of his misery thinned and his sight came back, and he knew her, not a stranger after all, not an angel, not death itself, but his nurse, philosophy, in whose halls he had spent his whole youth. The woman whose height would not stay still was the oldest companion he had, the presence from the library in Rome, come to find him in the one room where he had assumed no one would follow. His first words to her are almost an apology on her behalf. Why, he asks her, has the mistress of every excellence come down from on high into the loneliness of his exile? Is it so that she too can be persecuted with false accusations? Her answer settles the question of who she is more surely than the fiery eyes ever could. Could I desert you, my child, and not share the burden you carry because of the hatred my name attracts? It would not be lawful, she says, for philosophy to leave an innocent man companionless on the road. And is he imagining that this is somehow new, that wisdom has never before been in danger? Long before her servant Plato lived, she says, she waged war with the rashness of folly, and in Plato's own lifetime, in the translator's words, Socrates, his master, won with my aid the victory of an unjust death. She runs down the roll of her company like a veteran remembering campaigns. Philosophers banished, philosophers poisoned, philosophers tortured, some of the stories old and Greek, and some of them Roman and near at hand. Seneca, Soranus, names still warm in the memory of his own city. Their only crime, she says, was that they had been settled in her ways, and their lives were a standing rebuke to the ways of the wicked. He is not, in other words, the first man to lie in a cell for keeping her company. He is in the oldest and best society there is. Then she says a strange, calming thing about the wicked themselves. Yes, they are many, and the wise are few. But an army of the wicked is not really an army, because it has no leader. It is a mob, dragged here and there by blind error. When it masses and comes on in overwhelming strength, wisdom does not meet it in the open field. She withdraws her people into a citadel, she says, and lets the attackers spend themselves plundering the baggage left outside, the useless things, and from the ramparts the wise look down and laugh, safe behind a wall that folly has no ladder to reach. What can be carried off, she means, was never the treasure. The treasure is the one thing the mob cannot climb to. Only when he has poured out the whole of his grief, later in a long, unbroken flood, do we see her full method, and it is the method of a physician at a bedside. She listens with a calm face, in no way disturbed. She acknowledges everything, and then she declines to give him the strongest medicine, because he is not ready for it. His soul, she observes, is under a crowd of passions all pulling at once, anger, pain, and grief, and the strong remedies must wait. In the translator's words, "And so for a time I will use milder methods." Gentleness must come first, she says, to soften what has swollen and hardened until it can bear the force of something sharper. She had fed him her own milk when his mind was young. She knows precisely what he can digest tonight and what he cannot. And that is the one idea this chapter asks you to let settle. Without any effort, the way sediment settles in still water. In this book, philosophy is not a subject. She is a physician. She does not stand at a lectern. She sits on the edge of the bed. She does not begin by arguing. She begins by wiping the patient's eyes. Truth in her hands is a medicine with a dosage, and the dose is decided by love. So the cell is no longer what it was an hour ago. It had held one man and his grief, repeating each other in the dark. Now it holds a patient and a healer, and a course of treatment has quietly begun. Nothing more will be asked of him tonight, and nothing at all is asked of you. Someone has come, and she intends to stay, and she keeps the lamp lit either way. Chapter 4. The Complaint. Before any cure, there is a rule, and philosophy states it at the bedside in words the translator gives simply. If thou lookest for the physician's help, thou must needs disclose thy wound. She has watched him weep. Now she needs him to speak. She even teases him a little first, asking whether her words are sinking in at all, or whether they fall on him the way lyre music falls on a donkey's ears. It works. He gathers what strength he has, and the wound opens. Does the cruelty of fortune really need telling? He asks her. Does the very look of this place say nothing? Is this the library in his house, the room she chose for her own, where they sat so often talking over everything in heaven and earth? Was he dressed like this when they traced the paths of the stars together? He had gone into public life, he reminds her, on her own instruction and Plato's counsel, so that government should not be left to the unprincipled, to the ruin of the good. He had obeyed. He had brought to office, he swears, no ambition of his own, nothing but care for the common good, and he had made the enemies that honest men make. And this cell, he says, this is the recompense of my obedience. But a mind like his cannot keep a grief merely personal, and this is where his complaint becomes philosophy and becomes ours. What breaks him in the end is not that wicked men wished him harm. That, he says, may be charged to human weakness. The astonishing thing, the monstrous thing, is that they succeeded, that scoundrels were able to carry out their worst designs against an innocent man while God looked on. And he reaches for the oldest question there is, one asked. He says, by a disciple of philosophy's own school. In the translator's words, if God exists, whence comes evil? Yet whence comes good, if he exists not? You may have held that question yourself, some year of your life, turning it over, feeling how heavy it is for its size. Then, because this is a book that sings whenever speech runs out, his complaint rises into a prayer. He addresses the builder of the starry sky, who turns the swift heavens and guides the stars by law. Everything up there obeys. The evening star rises on its schedule. The days shorten under winter and lengthen into summer because they are told to. The leaves fall before the cold north wind and return at the first soft one. The sowing and the harvest keep their appointments. Each thing, the song says, stays in the place appointed for it. Only man, it seems, is let loose. Only human affairs are left untended, for wanton fortune to play with. The punishments meant for guilt fall on the innocent. The profane sit high and vent their malice on the just. Kings whom nations fear grovel in the dust when the wicked are strong. Look on this earth, the prayer ends. We are not the least part of what you made, and we are tossed on a sea. Steady the water, rule the earth by the same order that rules your sky. What philosophy does next is stranger and gentler than any rebuttal. She is not disturbed. She does not dispute a single fact. His services were real, she says, and if anything, he has understated them. The crimes of his accusers are known to everyone. His griefs are true griefs, truly listed. She grants the entire case, and then she repeats it back to him with one word quietly changed. He has called himself an exile, banished from everything. And an exile, she agrees, is exactly what he is. She knew it the moment she saw his tears. But banished he is not. He has strayed, rather, wandered from himself, and if he insists on the harder word, then he has banished himself, because over a mind no other power in the world ever held that authority. She explains, and the explanation is the first fixed star this book offers. His true country, the one she means, is not Rome, and no senate sits in it. It is governed, she says, not as Athens once was, by the sovereignty of the many, but by a single ruler, a single king, who delights in the number of his citizens and never in their expulsion. And to obey him, she says, is not servitude, but perfect freedom. Its most ancient law is this, that no one who has chosen to make his dwelling there can ever be sent away. Inside those ramparts, exile is simply impossible. The only way out is to stop wanting to live there. And so, she tells him, it is not the sight of this cell that troubles her. it is the sight of him. She does not miss his library in Rome, she says, with all its glass and ivory. The room she kept was never that one. It was the chamber of his mind, and what she stored there was never books, but the thing that gives books whatever value they have. Then, like any careful physician, she takes his pulse, with a handful of small questions, asked one at a time. Does he believe the world is driven along by random chance, or steered by reason? He does not waver even now. God the Creator governs what he has made, he answers, and no day will ever come that drives him from that belief. Good, she says. Then by what means does God govern it? And he stops. He does not understand the question, much less have an answer. Does he remember the end of all things, the goal toward which the whole of nature aims? He once knew, he admits, but sorrow has dulled his memory. Does he at least remember that he is a man? Of course, he says. Then what is a man? And the great scholar gives a schoolbook answer, a reasoning animal, subject to death. She asks if he knows himself to be anything more than that, and he answers with a single word, nothing. There is the wound, and she names it in a single sentence. Thou hast ceased to know thy own nature. Everything else, she says, unfolds from this. Because he has forgotten what he is, he counts himself an exile, stripped of his blessings. Because he has forgotten the end toward which all things move, he imagines that wicked men are happy and powerful. And because he has forgotten how the world is governed, he supposes that fortune's changes ebb and flow with no hand on them, unguided and unwatched. 3 sorrows she shows him, and beneath them a single forgetting. These, she says plainly, are causes grave enough not only for sickness, but for death. The complaint he laid against the world turns out to be a map, and every road on it leads back inside the patient. And yet the examination has found one thing sound, and everything to come is built on it. He still believes, he said it through his tears, that the world is subject not to chance, but to divine reason. That surviving conviction, she says, is the divine spark, the little live coal under all that ash. Have no fear, she tells him in the translator's words, for from these weak embers the vital heat shall once more be kindled within thee. But the time for strong remedies is not yet. False opinions have gathered like weather, and first the mists must be thinned. The song she sings over him then is all sky and water. Stars shed no light through black night when the clouds hide them. The sea, glass clear in calm, goes turbid and blind when storms stir the mud of it. A stream running bright off a hill is stopped by one tumbled rock. If you would see the truth in a clear light, she sings, then joy and fear, hope and grief must loosen their hold, for the mind where they reign is clouded and bound and lost. That is the whole first movement of the cure, and if your thoughts have loosened by now and started to wander somewhere softer, that is entirely all right. Nothing in this hour depends on your holding it. What has happened tonight is small and enormous at once. A man declared with perfect justice that the world had wronged him, and his physician agreed with every word, and then showed him that the wound lay somewhere else, somewhere inward, somewhere reachable. Nothing outside the cell has improved. The sentence stands, the accusers sleep soundly. The miles to Rome have not shortened by one step. But if the exile is inward, then a cell will do as well as a palace for the journey home, and the journey home has quietly begun. She has found her one live ember, and for tonight she asks nothing more of it, and neither will we. The lamp is low, the questions are finished, and somewhere under the ash of a ruined life, a small warmth has been located and marked and kept. It will still be glowing when the story returns, and it needs nothing from you. Let the night hold all of this now, the cell, the physician, the banked and patient fire. And if sleep is near you, it is safe to follow it down. Chapter 5. The Wheel. Somewhere in the second book of the Consolation there stands a wheel. It is a great wheel, turning slowly in the dark, patient as the stars, and on its rim ride kings, one side forever rising, the other forever carrying its riders down, and no one who climbs aboard is allowed to choose a side. The second book opens quietly. Philosophy has sung her first songs, gentle ones, and now, before she says anything more, she simply stops for a while and lets the silence rest on her patient, until his attention drifts back to her of its own accord. Then she names his sickness. He is pining, she tells him, for the fortune he has lost. It is not the prison itself that is breaking him. It is the change, the suddenness of the change, and the long backward look at everything that used to be his. So she begins with the medicine she calls soft and pleasant to the taste, a draught meant to prepare the way for stronger potions, and she calls in rhetoric and music, her handmaids, to sweeten it. He believes that fortune has changed toward him. She answers that fortune has not changed at all, that change is the one thing fortune never fails to provide. Such were always her ways, she says, and such is her nature. Then she offers him a sentence that folds the whole paradox into a few words. In the words of the translation, rather in her very mutability hath she preserved towards thee her true constancy. The goddess of luck, after all, is painted blind. She veils her face from most people for as long as they live. To Boethius, she has finally shown the whole of it, and that unveiling, bitter as it feels, is a strange kind of honesty. If he likes her, philosophy says, let him take her as she is and not complain. If he cannot bear her faithlessness, let him turn away and be free of her. A man who commits his sails to the winds goes where the winds carry him, not where he intended to go. A man who entrusts seed to a field accepts the barren years along with the fruitful ones. And a man who once laid his head beneath fortune's yoke, as Boethius did in the days of her favour, cannot afterward write laws for his mistress about staying and going. A wheel that agreed to stand still, she adds, would simply stop being the wheel of fortune. Then philosophy does something remarkable, something almost playful. She proposes to argue for a while in Fortune's own words, so that the accused may speak in her own defense, and she asks the prisoner only to listen and judge whether the case is fair. So, for a little while, in a prison cell near Pavia, the goddess of luck is given a voice. What wrong, Fortune asks him, has she ever done? What goods of his has she ever taken? Let him choose any judge he pleases, and argue before that judge about the true ownership of wealth and rank. If he can prove that any of these things ever belonged to any mortal man, she will freely grant that what he claims was his. When nature brought him out of his mother's womb, naked and owning nothing, it was Fortune who took him up. She cherished him with her own substance. She raised him, she admits, in the partiality of her favor, somewhat too indulgently, and surrounded him with the royal abundance of everything in her power. And that, she suggests, is the very reason he finds it so hard to let her go now. For now it is her pleasure to draw back her hand. He has had the use of goods that were never his own. A loan is being recalled, and a recalled loan is not a theft. The translation gives her argument a lawyer's precision. Thou hast reason to thank me for the use of what was not thine own. Thou hast no right to complain, as if thou hadst lost what was wholly thine. Wealth and honours, she goes on, are her handmaidens. They know their mistress. They arrive when she arrives, and when she goes, they gather their things and go with her, as they always have. And why, she asks, should she alone in all the world be forbidden to change? The sky is allowed to pour out bright day and then shroud everything in night. The year is allowed to garland the earth with flowers and fruit, and then disfigure it with storm and cold. The sea is allowed to lie smooth and inviting in the morning, and to rise rough and grey by nightfall. Only Fortune, it seems, is expected to hold still forever, because human longing cannot bear to lose what it has been holding. Then she says the thing the whole book has been circling, the plainest confession she ever makes. This is my art, this the game I never cease to play. I turn the wheel that spins. I delight to see the high come down and the low ascend. She is not finished, and there is no cruelty in what follows, only the rules of the game, stated in the open. Mount up if thou wilt, but only on condition that thou wilt not think it a hardship to come down when the rules of my game require it. And had he truly not known her ways? She reminds him of Croesus, king of the Lydians, once the dreaded rival of Cyrus, who ended condemned to the pyre and was saved from the fire only by a sudden rain out of heaven. She reminds him of the story he learned as a child, that at the threshold of Zeus there stand two jars, one full of blessings and the other of sorrows, and every mortal life is poured from both. Perhaps, she says, he has merely drawn a little too generously from the better jar. Perhaps she has not wholly left him even now. Perhaps her changefulness, the very thing he is mourning, is itself a fair ground for hoping better things. If, somewhere in Fortune's speech, your attention has slipped off the rim of the wheel and begun to glide, let it glide. Nothing here needs to be remembered, and the wheel will go on turning, very slowly, wherever your thoughts wander next. When the speech ends, Boethius answers like the honest man he is. The pleas are plausible, he admits, steeped in the honeyed sweetness of music and rhetoric. But their charm lasts only while the words are sounding, and when the sound dies away, the old sorrow, which lives deeper down than the ear, aches exactly as before. Philosophy does not argue with him. These were never the cure, she agrees, only the gentle preliminaries. The remedies that go deep are still to come in their due season. But before going deeper, she asks him to weigh the wheel fairly and remember how high it once carried him. An orphan, taken into the care of the most illustrious men of the city. A marriage into the highest family of the state, whose love he had won even before the wedding bound him to their house. And one day above all the others, the day his 2 sons rode out from home together as joint consuls, with senators walking in their train and the crowd pressing close in goodwill. The day he gave the speech in the king's honor in the Senate House and won fame for his eloquence. The day he sat at the games between his 2 boys and showered gifts on the multitude. Fortune had never before granted such a day to any private citizen. Anyone who means to cast up accounts with her, philosophy says, must enter that day in the ledger too. And so, the one idea of this chapter settles quietly into place. Nothing on the wheel was ever his. Not the offices, not the money, not the applause. They were never possessions, only visits. What fortune gave was on loan from the beginning, and the grief of losing it may be human and real, but the charge of theft will not stand in any court. Even her last comfort is strange and calm, since no mortal keeps fortune forever. Whether a man leaves her at the end or she flies away first comes, at last, to very nearly the same quiet thing. Boethius will spend the rest of the book learning what does belong to him, the kind of possession no wheel can carry away. But that is for a later hour of the night. The wheel itself turns on whether anyone watches it or not. It carried kings up and down long before he was born, and it asks for no hand on the rim, neither his nor yours. It turns, and the night turns with it, and both can be trusted to keep turning gently while you rest. Chapter 6. What fortune cannot take. When a storm has passed through a harbour, there comes a grey, quiet hour when the owners walk down to the water to see what is left. Some boats are gone, some are broken, and some ride at anchor where they were left, because the anchors all along were holding. The later chapters of the second book are that hour. A man and his teacher standing at the water's edge, counting what the storm could not take. Boethius begins the counting badly, the way most of us would. All that you say is true, he tells his teacher, and yet the memory of the good years is precisely what hurts the most. In the words of the translation, for truly in adverse fortune the worst sting of misery is to have been happy. Philosophy's answer is not to argue with the sting, but to open the ledger. If it is fortune's kind of happiness he grieves for, she says, then let him reckon up how rich he still is. Symmachus, his wife's father, the man in whose household he was raised, a man whose splendid character she calls an honor to the human race, is alive and unharmed, grieving only over the wrongs done to his son-in-law. His safety alone is a thing Boethius would gladly have bought at the price of his own life. His wife lives, gentle and modest, weary of her days only because they are days without him, keeping hold of life for his sake alone. His sons, the two young consuls, are alive, and in them, as far as youth allows, their father's and their grandfather's character already shines out. Since the dearest care of mortals is to preserve life itself, she tells him, he is happier than he knows, for he still possesses what no one doubts to be dearer than life. So let him dry his tears. Fortune's hatred has not swept away everyone he loves. The storm, for all its violence, is not past bearing, because some anchors are still holding firm. And he grants it in the voice of a man only half comforted. While those anchors hold, he says, he will somehow ride out the storm. But look how much of the splendor of his fortunes is shorn away. Here her patience sharpens a little. Who has ever enjoyed a felicity so settled, she asks, that he had no quarrel with his lot? No one's happiness arrives complete, and no one's stays. One man has riches, and is ashamed of the family he came from. Another carries a noble name through such poverty that he would rather be obscure. A third has wealth and birth together, and mourns an unmarried, empty house. Another is happily married and childless, and tends his money for a stranger to inherit. Another has children, and weeps over what a son or a daughter has become. In every lot, she says, there lurks something that chafes, invisible to everyone who has not carried that lot himself. And the more favored a man has been, the thinner his skin. A man unschooled by adversity is toppled by the lightest of griefs. How many people, she asks him, would think themselves lifted nearly to heaven if even a small piece from the wreck of his fortune fell to them? This very place he calls exile is, to the people who were born in it, simply their native land. Misery, in other words, keeps no fixed address. Nothing is wretched, she tells him, until thinking makes it so, and any lot is happy to the one who bears it with an even mind. Then comes the hinge of the chapter, and one of the hinges of the whole book. Why, she asks, do the children of mortality go looking outside themselves for a happiness whose seat is only within? Is there anything more precious to a man than himself? No, he will answer. Then the conclusion is already waiting for him. If, then, thou art master of thyself, thou wilt possess that which thou wilt never be willing to lose, and which fortune cannot take from thee. Everything that can be taken, she reasons, is carried at a hidden cost, and the cost is fear. A happiness that can be lost is held either in ignorance, by a man who does not know it can be lost, or in dread, by a man who cannot stop bracing for the loss. And a never-ceasing fear leaves no room for being happy. Either way, the gift trembles in the hand. Whatever the true good is, it must be the kind of thing that holds still. So philosophy walks him through the great inventory of things men call theirs, and shows him, almost tenderly, that not one of them was ever anybody's. Money behaves strangely for a possession. It shows its worth in the spending, not the hoarding. Yet the coin given away is exactly the coin no longer owned, so money is only precious in the act of leaving. She notices, too, something a listener in the dark may like. A voice can fill the ears of many people at once and remain whole. But riches cannot pass to many without breaking and growing less, and a fortune gathered in one place is always missing from another. Jewels have their splendor, she grants, but the flashing light lives in the stones and not in the man who wears them, and a beauty of a lower order than your own cannot raise you. The fields are lovely, and so are the calm sea, the sky, the stars, the moon, and the sun. But which of them is yours? Are you decked with the flowers of spring, she asks? Does your fertility swell in the fruits of autumn? Fortune can never sign over to a man what the nature of things has ruled out of ownership altogether. Even the servants of a great house are no true holding, for if they are honest, their virtue is their own wealth and not their master's. Nature herself is content with few things, and with very little of these. Whoever piles more onto enough finds the excess either joyless or harmful. There is even a practical edge to all this. Wealth has often wounded the very men who held it, and the man who carries treasure walks the road afraid, while he who set out through life with empty pockets, she reminds him, could sing in the robber's face. Whatever injures the one who holds it was never really his good at all. And when everything on the list has been crossed off, what remains is the one thing that was never on it. No man, she says, can truly rule another except in the body, and in what is lower than the body, by which she means fortune. The mind is out of reach. No sentence, no confiscation, no decree can drag a mind out of its calm once reason has set that calm in order. The free spirit takes no orders, and nothing fortune carries in her hands is of its kind. Locked in a cell, stripped of his offices and his fortune, Boethius still holds the one estate that has no gate. Late in the second book, philosophy makes a confession that sounds at first like a joke. She does not wage implacable war against fortune, and there is one moment when the deceitful goddess serves men well. It is the moment she takes off her mask, uncovers her face, and confesses what she is. The moment things go wrong. Strange as it sounds, ill fortune is of more use to men than good fortune, and the translation gives the reason in a single breath. For good fortune, when she wears the guise of happiness and most seems to caress, is always lying. Ill fortune is always truthful, since in changing, she shows her inconstancy. The kind face deceives, and the hard face teaches. The first binds hearts to counterfeit goods. The second sets them loose by showing how frail those goods always were. And sometimes, in the book's rough image, ill fortune hauls men back toward the true good with grappling irons. The last of her honest services is the sweetest. Prosperity, with its crowds, hid the faces of his real friends among the faces of the flatterers, and no price could then have bought the difference, Adversity has sorted them without being asked. Fortune, in leaving, took her own friends away with her, and left him his. And so the chapter closes on the gentlest sentence in the second book. Cease then to seek the wealth thou hast lost, since in true friends thou hast found the most precious of all riches. The count comes out, in the end, not empty, but strange. A family beyond the reach of confiscation, a mind that no order can enter, friends proved true by the worst of weather. Nothing on that short list can be carried off by anything that turns. It is all with him in the cell as the lamp burns low, and the like of it is with you wherever you are resting. And what is truly yours tonight will still be truly yours in the morning. Chapter 7. The False Roads. At dusk, every road out of a city looks like the way home. The travellers on all of them walk with the same tiredness and the same hope, and each, if asked, would give a different name to the same place. The third book of the Consolation opens onto a map of 5 such roads, and philosophy now walks, each one, patiently, to its end. Boethius by now is stronger. He no longer dreads the sharper remedies she once postponed, and even asks for them. So she tells him where the whole cure is headed, to true felicity, the happiness, in the words of the translation, which even now thy spirit sees in dreams, but cannot behold in very truth, while thine eyes are engrossed with semblances. Even a troubled mind dreams of the true good, she believes, a fitting thing to hear at the edge of sleep, where you may be closer to such dreams than the waking ever are. First, the map. All mortal creatures, she says, for all their various pursuits, take many different paths, yet strive toward one goal, happiness. And the good they seek is that state which, once a man has it, leaves him nothing further to want. Some seek it as wealth, so that they will never again know need. Some as high office, so that they will be honored. Some as power, wanting to rule or to stand close to rulers. Some as fame, a name spread wide through the arts of war or peace, and a great many as pleasure, plain gladness of heart. Noble birth is wanted for the renown in it, wife and children for their sweetness. Even the body's gifts, strength and beauty and health, fold into the same 5 hopes. Men even trade ends and means, wanting riches for power, or power for a name. But all the roads, by their windings, point at one destination. Here is the tender part of her teaching. None of these travellers is a fool. Is a man wrong to want to escape need? No, she says. A state filled with every good, needing nothing from outside, wholly self-sufficient, is exactly the shape of happiness. Is reverence contemptible? Is power feeble? Is renown nothing? Is joy worthless? No, and no again. Happiness, whatever it is, will not be anxious and grey. Every road was surveyed toward something real, and the agreement of all hearts about the destination shows, she says, how strong nature is in us. In the words of the translation, man's mind seeks to recover its proper good, in spite of the mistiness of its recollection, but, like a drunken man, knows not by what path to return home. We are not lost because we have no home. We are lost because we remember it too dimly to steer by. Then she takes the first road, wealth, in a little exchange of questions. When he was at his richest, was his mind ever wholly free of worry? He cannot remember one such hour. Something was always absent that he wished present, or present that he wished away. But a man who lacks anything is not self-sufficient, and self-sufficiency was the one thing money had promised. Worse, money brings needs of its own. Nothing in its nature prevents the stronger from taking it from the weaker, which is where lawsuits come from, and so its owner needs guards he never needed while poor. The wealth that was to set him free stands watch over itself all night. The rich grow hungry too. The rich feel winter too. Yes, comes the objection, but the rich have the means to satisfy hunger and drive off cold. The translation answers dryly, want can thus be soothed by riches, wholly removed it cannot be. For nature, very little is enough. For greed, nothing is. The second road is high office, and it proves shorter than it looks. Dignities fall so often to the unworthy, she observes, that they cannot be what plants worth in a man. More often the office is a lamp held up beside its holder, and what it lights is the unworthiness. Nor is the reverence stored inside the title itself. Let a man who has been consul many times travel among peoples who have never heard of Rome, and the office wins him nothing there. If dignity were natural to rank, it would work everywhere and always, the way fire is hot in every country. Even at home it fades. The prefecture, once a great power, is now an empty name, a burden on a senator's fortune. Virtue is otherwise. She has a dignity of her own, she says, and passes it at once to anyone joined to her. Offices can only borrow that light, and only for a while. The third road is power, kingship itself, and here the book grows quiet. The happiness of kings does not last. Antiquity is full of thrones turned to calamity, she says, and so are these present days. One tyrant who knew what his own condition was worth pictured the fear that haunts a throne as a sword hanging over a man's head. What kind of power is it, she asks, that cannot even keep its own possessor safe? The king rings himself with a bodyguard, and is then at the mercy of the men he pays to protect him. He terrifies many, and for that very reason fears the many he terrifies. His friends fare no better. Nero drove his own teacher Seneca to his death. Seneca had offered to give back his entire wealth and retire, and even that was refused. When the great totter, their very greatness drags them down, and friends gathered by fortune belong to the fortune, not the man, so the turning that made them will unmake them. The fourth road is fame, and she hardly slows her step for it. A great name is built, often enough, on the mistaken beliefs of the multitude, and what could be more shameful than praise that is false? Even honest renown adds nothing to the wise man who measures his good by the truth of his own conscience, not the noise of reputation. No name travels everywhere. The man called glorious in one quarter of the globe walks unknown in the next. And the fame of noble birth is not even the owner's. It is lent by the merits of ancestors, and the praise, if it belongs to anyone, belongs to them. The one real gift in a distinguished name she allows is an obligation, not to fall below the virtue of the people who made it. The fifth road is pleasure, and it is the shortest of all. The craving for it is full of restlessness, she says, and the satisfaction full of regret, and anyone who has walked it may consult his own memory. The book gives pleasure the emblem of the bee, honey first, then the sting, then the flight away, with the smart left rankling deep in the heart. Even the body's innocent goods are small and brief. No man will outdo the elephant in bulk, the bull in strength, or the tiger in speed. And the loveliest face, she says, can be undone by the small flame of a fever of 3 days. In the middle of these arguments, the book sets a song, and in it there is a bird. A songbird lives in a cage, where a doting mistress feeds it honeyed sweets. It wants for nothing a bird could want, except the one thing it is. If, hopping from bar to bar, it glimpses the shade of the woods, it will spurn every dainty in the dish, long for the woods only, and sing the woods in every song it has. The bird's discontent is not ingratitude. It is the surest evidence of where it belongs. And the unrest that no wealth, office, power, fame, or pleasure has ever quieted is testimony of the same kind. All things, the song says, yearn in due time for their due return. You do not need to keep the 5 roads straight tonight, if they have already begun to braid together in your drifting thoughts. Let them braid, for they were always one road wearing 5 names. When the walk is over, philosophy states the finding without triumph. It is beyond doubt, then, that these paths do not lead to happiness. They cannot guide anyone to the promised goal. Not one of the 5 goods is wicked. That was never the trouble. The trouble is that each one is a fragment that swore it was the whole. Wealth is a piece of sufficiency, office a piece of respect, power a piece of strength, fame a piece of recognition, pleasure a piece of joy. And a man may gather all 5 pieces into his lap and find they still do not make the whole they were broken from. So the search is not defeated, it is only turned around. If happiness has its seat within us, then no road leading outward was ever going to arrive, and the true road must run the other way, and it is short. Let the 5 roads lie quiet in the dark, then, with their travellers resting. The caged bird is asleep with the woods folded in its heart. And the way home, when it opens, will ask no walking at all, for it begins exactly where you are lying now. Chapter 8. The One Good. By now, if you have been following with half-closed eyes, 5 roads have been walked to their ends. Wealth, high office, power, fame, and pleasure have each been followed as far as they will go, and each has ended a little short of home. The prisoner sees this himself, and says so. He can find no true sufficiency in riches, no real strength in thrones, no reverence in titles, no fame worth keeping in glory, no joy that stays in pleasure. What remains, in the quiet of the cell, is the question underneath, the one this whole night of the book has been moving toward. Why do the 5 roads fail? And what were they roads to? Philosophy's answer begins with something almost geometrical, and yet you can feel it in your hands. Happiness, she says, is by nature one thing, single and whole, and human error does to it what impatience does to every whole thing. In the words of his translator, that which is simple and indivisible by nature, human error separates and transforms from the true and perfect to the false and imperfect. We take the one good and cut it into portions, and then go shopping for the portions one at a time. But what has no parts cannot be owned in parts. Whoever tries to win a piece of it gains neither the piece, since there are no pieces, nor the whole, which he never thought to ask for. She lets him watch this failure at work in an ordinary life. A man who fears want, and so gives his whole strength to gathering money, stops caring about power. He keeps himself small and unnoticed, and even denies himself pleasure after pleasure, so that the money will stay. And at the end of it, he has not bought what he wanted, for he lives anxious, guarded, and obscure, which is to say, he is still in want. Another man thirsts for power and squanders his wealth to reach it, and despises comfort along the way. Then he finds that a powerful man who lacks necessities and is gnawed day and night by worry has quietly ceased to be powerful at all. Each of the 5, pursued alone, loses even itself. And the man who chases all 5 as 5 separate prizes is only running 5 errands for one heart. So the 5 names turn out to be 5 names for a single substance. Independence, power, reverence, renown, and joy differ in name only, she tells him, and in substance not at all. Whatever could truly give one of them entire would be found holding all the rest. That one whole thing is what an older language called the summum bonum, the highest good, the complete and self-sufficient good beyond which nothing is left to want. The mortal goods are not counterfeits exactly. She grants that they give a kind of shadow of the true good, a fragment here and a fragment there, and shadows do resemble what casts them. But the true and perfect good itself is not for sale among things that can be lost. And here the book pauses in a way it has not paused before. Before asking where the perfect good makes its home, philosophy remembers the counsel of Plato in the Timaeus, that even in the smallest undertakings we ought to ask for divine help, and the prisoner agrees that they must call upon the Father of all things, for without that no beginning is rightly made. Then she lifts up her voice and sings. What she sings is the great central hymn of the whole work, the 9th song of Book 3, a prayer set like a lamp at the midpoint of the book's long night. It is addressed to the Maker of earth and sky, who rules the world by reason from age to age, at whose word time itself flows out of the deep of eternity, who is the source of movement for everything that moves, and is himself fixed and still. Nothing outside him compelled him to make the world, the hymn says. He shaped it from the form of perfect good that dwells in his own inmost being, free of all envy, and moulded the whole toward that pattern, a beautiful world in the image of the most beautiful. He binds the elements in a balanced harmony, so that hot and cold, moist and dry, hold together without warring, the fire not flying off into the sky, the waters not swallowing the land. Souls go out from him and are strewn wide over earth and heaven, and by a kind law they turn back toward him again, like fires drawn home. And then the great hymn becomes a plain request. Grant us to rise on the wing of reason. Grant us to see the fount of good. Scatter the heavy mists of earth and shine in your own splendor. For that sight the song ends, is serenity itself, and the rest of every faithful soul, the end of the journey and its beginning at once. One the guide, the traveler, the pathway, and the goal. When the song is finished, the argument resumes, and it moves now with a calm you can lean on. If we can recognize goods that are imperfect, she reasons, there must somewhere be a good that is perfect. For imperfection means falling short of something, and nature does not begin with broken and unfinished things and work upward. She begins from what is whole and perfect, and dwindles from there. And where does the perfect good make its home? The common belief of all mankind, she says, has always known. Men agree that God is good, since nothing better than God can be imagined, and what is supreme over all things must be full of the supreme good, or it would not be supreme. In her words, we have determined that true happiness is the perfect good, therefore true happiness must dwell in the supreme deity. Then she closes the last gap. God does not have happiness the way a rich man has a coat, received from somewhere else and worn over his nature. What God is and what happiness is are one and the same, and the source of all things is, in its own essence, the highest good. Then, borrowing a habit from the geometers, who love to hang a small deduction on a finished proof, she offers him a corollary, and it is one of the gentlest surprises in the book. People become happy by attaining happiness, but happiness is divinity itself. Therefore, people become happy by attaining divinity. Just as they become just by acquiring justice, and wise by acquiring wisdom, so, in the words of his translator, every man who is happy is a god, and though in nature God is one only, yet there is nothing to hinder that very many should be gods by participation in that nature. The thought is not proud, but tender. Happiness is not a wage paid out for the climb. It is a share in the life that waits at the top of it. You do not need to hold the steps of this in your mind. If the reasoning has already softened into a kind of music, that is the book doing its proper work. But there is one more movement worth hearing with the last of your attention, because it folds the whole world into the argument. Whatever exists, she observes, exists by holding together. A living creature is alive, while soul and body keep to one another, and not after. Herbs and trees grow where their natures can hold on, their roots drinking like mouths in the dark of the soil, the soft pith wrapped in wood and bark against the weather. Flame leaps upward, and earth presses down, each thing keeping to what preserves it. Even in sleep, we go on breathing without being asked. Everything that is strives to remain one, because to scatter is to cease. And since unity and goodness turn out to be the same thing, All things, simply by holding themselves together, are quietly desiring the good, so that you could describe the good, she says, as the thing that all things desire. That is why the end and aim of the whole universe is not a secret reserved for scholars. It is what every root and flame and sleeping creature is already doing. And the God in whom that good dwells does not govern with a yoke pressed onto unwilling necks. He steers all things by goodness, the way a ship is held steady and in order by rudder and helm, and whatever follows its own nature is already obeying him gladly, as a tired body obeys the pull of rest. Nothing has the will to resist that kind of strength, and nothing has the power. So the search that began among market stalls ends at a still and generous centre, one good wearing many names, drawing all things home to itself. You are among the things it draws. Let yourself be drawn then, without any effort at all, the way water finds its level in the dark. Chapter 9. Why Evil Seems to Win. There is a moment near the beginning of Book 4 when the lesson stops being a lesson. Philosophy has sung, softly and sweetly, of a light that makes the sunbeam look dim, and she is about to continue when the prisoner breaks in. He does it courteously, the way a patient interrupts a trusted physician, but he does interrupt, because beneath all his agreement, one wound has not closed. Everything she has shown about the one good he accepts. The arguments seem to him divine in themselves and beyond overthrow. And still, somewhere beyond the wall of his cell, wicked men are flourishing, and he is the one wearing chains. His objection deserves to be heard as he makes it. Here, he says, is the very chief cause of his grief, that, in the words of his translator, while there exists a good ruler of the universe, it is possible that evil should be at all, still more that it should go unpunished. And the marvel does not stop there. Wickedness reigns and flourishes, while virtue not only goes without reward, but is thrust down and trampled under the feet of the wicked, and suffers the punishments that belong to crime. That this should happen under a God who knows all things and can do all things, and who wills only good, seems to him past all wondering and past all lament. It is one of the oldest complaints in the world, and one of the plainest, and the book does not scold him for making it. Philosophy does not soften the strangeness. She sharpens it. It would indeed be astounding, she agrees, a thing more horrible than any monster, if in the well-ordered house of so great a householder the cheap vessels were polished and honoured while the precious ones were left to tarnish. But it is not so, she says, and she makes the promise that the rest of Book 4 exists to keep. If their earlier conclusions hold firm, then he shall learn, in her words, that the good are always strong, the bad always weak and impotent, that vices never go unpunished, nor virtues unrewarded. More than that, she will fasten wings to his mind, she tells him, wings on which it can rise above the confusion and come home safely under her guidance. The song she sings there is about that flight, a soul climbing on swift wings past the clouds and the turning spheres, up to the fount of light where the King of the world keeps his calm reign. and it closes with a quiet astonishment that from such a height, looking back down, the tyrants whom the nations fear are seen to be exiles, huddled far from home. Hold that image loosely. The whole argument of this chapter is folded up inside it. The argument itself begins with two humble words, will and power. Whatever human beings accomplish requires both. Where the will is missing, nothing is attempted, and where the power is missing, the will strains in vain. So whenever you see a man wanting some end and failing to reach it, you may be sure he lacked the power to get what he wished for. And what do all men wish for? She reminds him of what they established together earlier, that every human aim, by whatever crooked route, is set on happiness, and that happiness is the good itself. Good men and bad men want the same harbour. They differ only in the sailing. The good seek it through the natural action of the virtues, the way feet were made for walking. The bad grasp at the very same thing through their cravings, which is not the natural way of attaining good at all. She gives him a picture to keep beside that thought. Walking is a man's natural motion. Suppose one man walks to his destination on his feet, while another, who has lost the use of his feet, tries to make the same journey on his hands. Which of the two would you call the stronger? No one hesitates over the answer. Yet this, she suggests, is what wickedness is, the attempt to travel toward the one destination every heart is bound for, while overturned, on the wrong limbs, by enormous effort in the wrong element. The wicked are not walking a different road to a darker country of their own, and arriving there. There is no other country. They are failing laboriously to arrive at the only one there is. Strength, then, has a measure, and the measure is attainment. Just as the strongest walker is the one whose legs can carry him to the farthest point there is, so the truly strong man is the one who actually reaches the end of desire, beyond which nothing further remains to be desired. And by that measure, the flourishing of the wicked is a trick of the middle distance. Poor wretches, she calls them, with more sorrow in it than contempt. They toil day and night, and the very thing for which they toil is what they never compass. The prizes they do win, the offices, the fortunes, the satisfactions, were all instruments aimed at happiness, and the happiness is what does not come. Even nature's own mighty help, which all but drags every creature toward the good, cannot carry them there against their own constant swerving. Then the argument deepens into something that sounds, at first hearing, impossible, and she says it knowing exactly how it sounds. In the words of his translator, "To some it may seem strange that we should assert that the bad, who form the greater part of mankind, do not exist." She does not mean that they are not there. She means that being evil is a way of leaking one's own existence. A thing is, she explains, while it keeps its place and holds its nature. Whatever falls away from its nature falls away from the being that belongs to it. As a body that has died may be called a dead man, but no longer simply a man. So too the ability the wicked boast of is the kind of ability that nothing supplies. God can do all things, and God cannot do evil. Therefore, doing evil is no part of what power means. The capacity for crime is not strength, any more than the capacity for stumbling is part of what it means to dance. Evil, she has told him already, is nothing, and no one is made mighty by nothing. The song that follows quietly undresses a king. Picture the monarch high on his throne, resplendent in purple, hedged about with flashing steel, his brow dark with menace. How dreadful his power seems. But lift away the robes of his state, the song says, and you will see what this Lord of the earth is really wearing underneath, a load of secret chains. Lust poisons him, rage sweeps through him like weather, sorrow wears at him, deluding hopes torment him. He lives under many masters, and never manages to do what he truly wills. This, philosophy says, is a judgment Plato reached long before, and it was true that the wise alone are able to do what they would, while the wicked follow their own heart's lust, but cannot accomplish what they would. So the question that opened the chapter begins to loosen, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling on both ends. Why does evil seem to win? Because we measure winning from the middle of the story, by the palace, and not by the arrival. And for the wicked, there is no arrival. Seen from the height her wings allow, the feared tyrants are exiles. The conquerors are men travelling on their hands, far from home and getting no nearer. And the strong are the good, who may hold nothing at all in the world, and yet are the only ones receiving what every heart was made to receive. None of this asks you to pretend that injustice does not wound. The prisoner never pretends it, and the book never asks it. It says only that harming and winning are different things, and that no one was ever defeated into being wicked, nor enriched into being happy. For tonight, then, you can let the wicked go. They were never the strong ones, and they were never really winning. Sleep is on the side of things that hold together. Chapter 10. The Punishment of Wickedness. A runner, in the old contests, ran for the sake of a wreath, a circle of green leaves set on the winner's head at the end of the course. Philosophy borrows that image as Book 4 goes on, because it answers a question so simple that hardly anyone thinks to ask it. What is the reward of being good? In every kind of transaction, she says, the thing for whose sake an action is done may justly be counted. That action's reward, as the wreath for whose sake the race is run, is the reward held out for running. And the thing for whose sake all things are done, this whole night has been teaching, is happiness, the good itself. So the reward of goodness is not wages paid afterward, from outside, by somebody who might forget. The reward of goodness is the good, and the good man already has it, simply by being what he is. That is why her next claim, which sounds at first like bravado, is really just careful bookkeeping. Let the wicked rage as violently as they please, the crown will not fall from the head of the wise, nor will it wither. No other man's unrighteousness can strip a righteous soul of its proper glory. If the prize had been handed to him from outside, then someone outside could take it back. But since it is conferred on him by his own righteousness, he can lose it in only one way, by ceasing to be righteous. The good man travels with his wreath already on his head. Then she turns the coin over, and the chapter finds its one idea. In the words of his translator, "As then righteousness itself is the reward of the righteous, so wickedness itself is the punishment of the unrighteous." Punishment, like reward, is not something waiting at the end of a long delay in a courtroom that may never be convened. It is administered continuously by the crime to the criminal. No one who is visited with punishment, she observes, doubts that he is visited with evil, and the wicked are not merely brushed by the worst of all evils, but deeply stained with it. If they were willing to weigh their own case, they could not count themselves unpunished. She shows him what that punishment looks like from the inside, and it is a strange, sad bestiary. Goodness lifts a man above what mere humanity can reach. Wickedness through the same door lets him down below it. The violent man who lives by seizing what belongs to others has the spirit of a wolf. The restless, quarrelsome man, forever wrangling in the courts, is like a dog yapping at everything that passes. The hidden schemer who delights in fraud is own brother to the fox. The man who cannot govern his rage carries a lion about inside his chest. The coward, trembling where nothing threatens, is a deer. The dull and sluggish man grazes through his days like a donkey. The fickle one, alighting on nothing for long, is all bird, and the man sunk in foul pleasure wallows like a pig. The body still stands upright and keeps its human face, she says, but the nature inside it has quietly changed kingdoms. The song she sings here remembers Circe, the enchantress of the island, whose cup transformed the storm-driven sailors of Odysseus, one into a boar, one into a lion, one into a wolf who, when he tried to weep, could only howl. And yet the poem draws a surprising moral out of the old magic. Those herbs were feeble after all, it says, for they could alter every outward part and never reach the heart. Inside the monstrous bodies, the minds of the men stood unaltered, grieving for what had happened to them. The true poisons work the other way about. They are the ones that leave the body whole and well presented and quietly carry off the soul. From all of this, a hard but consoling arithmetic follows, and the book takes its time over it. The prisoner says he wishes the wicked could lose their license to destroy good men. She answers that they will lose it sooner than he hopes, and sooner than they themselves expect, for within the narrow bounds of this brief life, nothing is long in coming. But the deeper point is stranger. If it is wretched to will evil, it is more wretched to be able to accomplish it, and more wretched still to accomplish it in fact. The will, the power, and the deed are three layers of one misfortune. Take away the deed and the power, and you have removed, layer by layer, real portions of misery. The successful villain is not the fortunate one. He is the one carrying the full threefold weight. Then comes the sentence that overturns the courtroom of common sense. Altogether. In her words, the wicked are happier in undergoing punishment than if no penalty of justice chastened them. She is careful about what she is not saying. She sets aside the familiar arguments that Punishment corrects the offender and warns onlookers, true as those may be. Her reasoning is simpler and stranger. Punishment, being just, is a good, and when a wicked man is punished, that good is added to his misery, one clean coin dropped into an empty bowl. When he escapes, something is added to him as well, and it is a further evil, the injustice of the escape itself. Misery with a little good mixed into it is lighter than misery with more evil poured in. So the punished wrongdoer is, in the exact accounting of this book, better off than the unpunished one. And the men we call lucky because they got away with it are the unluckiest men there are. By the same accounting, the one who does a wrong becomes more wretched than the one who suffers it. If you were the judge, she asks him, on whom would the sentence fall, the injurer or the injured? On the injurer, of course. The sufferer you would compensate at his cost. Then it is the doer of the wrong who stands revealed as the pitiable one, since baseness by its own nature makes its owner wretched. And here the practice of the law courts turns quietly inside out. Advocates labor to stir the judge's pity for the man who endured the harm. Yet pity, she says, is rather owed to the man who did it, who ought to be brought to judgment not in anger but in compassion and kindness, as a sick man is brought to the physician, so that the ulcer of his fault may be cut away by the punishment. The injured need justice, the injurer needs healing, and the same sentence can be both at once. If your thoughts have loosened by now and gone drifting somewhere gentler, let them go. Nothing in this hour needs to be remembered by morning. But if you are still listening, hear how far she carries it. Wickedness, on this view, is a sickness of the soul, as fever is a sickness of the body, and no one thinks the sick deserve hatred. They are nursed and pitied and sat beside. How much more, she asks, should pity go out to minds assailed by something crueler than any fever? In the words of his translator, for the wise no place is left for hatred, only the most foolish would hate the good, and to hate the bad is unreasonable. Hatred, in this book, is not so much wicked as mistaken, a misreading of the chart at the foot of the bed, anger spent on a patient. The little song that closes this part of the book looks out over the world's furious quarrels and asks, gently, why? Why all this strife, when life is already so brief and so breakable? Why should men, on whom the wild beasts vent rage enough, point steel at their own brothers? If you would give each person his due, the song answers, then in its own words, thy love the good must have, the bad thy pity claim. Love for the good, pity for the erring, hatred for no one. It is less a commandment than a setting down of weight, the weight of every grudge and every ledger of wrongs, none of which was ever yours to carry through the night, and you may set it down now, on the floor beside the bed, and rest. Chapter 11. Providence and Fate. One knot remains in the prisoner's chest, and he unties it slowly and patiently, the way this book does everything. He can see now that the righteous and the wicked each carry their reward and their punishment within them. And still, he says, The fortunes of this world look shuffled. Good men are harassed with the penalties that belong to crime, while bad men carry off the rewards that belong to virtue. And the prison and the law were surely instituted for the mischievous, not for the innocent. If everything were the play of chance, he would wonder less. It is exactly his belief that God governs the world that makes the puzzle sharper. For when fortune goes sometimes with the good and sometimes with the bad, how does governance differ from chance, unless a reason can be found? Philosophy's first answer is a kindness. It is no wonder, she says, that things seem random and confused when the principle of their order is not known. And she sings him a small song about wonder itself. When the full moon suddenly goes pale in the middle of the night and the hidden stars shine out, whole nations stand at gaze and beat the air in wild amazement. Yet no one marvels that the breakers beat against the shore, or that ice gives way before summer's heat, because there the causes lie in plain sight. Only what is dark and hidden frightens us. The world is not stranger than the sea. We simply cannot yet see what moves it. Then she grows careful, because he has called her, she says, to the greatest of all subjects of inquiry, one that the most exhaustive treatment barely suffices to open. This is the country where questions multiply. Cut one doubt away, and countless others spring up like the heads of the Hydra. Providence, fate, chance, foreknowledge, freedom, all of it waits ahead. So she asks him to do without the pleasure of songs for a while, and begins to set the reasons out in their proper order. The book slows down here, and this chapter will keep its slow pace, which is a good pace for the hour you are in. Here is the distinction on which everything turns. The coming into being of all things, the whole course of change and motion in the world, receives its cause, its order, and its form from the steadfastness of the divine mind. A mind calm, she says, in the citadel of its own simplicity. Viewed in the purity of the divine intelligence itself, whole and present all at once, the plan is called providence. Viewed from below, unfolded among the moving things it governs, assigning to each thing its position and its form and its time, it is what the ancients called fate. She offers the craftsman as a picture of the difference. An artificer forms in his mind, beforehand, the idea of the thing he means to make, and holds it there complete, in a single instant of sight. Then he carries the design out through hours and days of work, one motion after another. What the finished form is in the maker's mind, that is providence. What the long labor is in time, that is fate. Not two rulers, but one wisdom seen from two distances. And then she reaches for the image this chapter has been traveling toward, the image of the circles. Think of several circles turning about the same fixed center. The outermost sweeps through a great round of space. The inner ones travel more gently, and whatever moves in toward the middle comes nearer to the stillness of the point itself. In the words of his translator, as the innermost of several circles revolving round the same center approaches the simplicity of the midmost point, and is, as it were, a pivot round which the exterior circles turn, so it stands, she says, with all things and the primal mind. Whatever departs widely from that first mind is wound the more deeply into fate's turning order, swung out on the wide rim of things. And things are free from fate, in her words, in proportion as they seek to come nearer to that central pivot. What cleaves closest to the still center shares in its stillness, and is no longer tossed by the turning at all. She gathers the thought into a chain of quiet proportions. As reasoning is to pure understanding, as the thing that becomes is to the thing that is, as time is to eternity, as the circle is to its center, so is the shifting course of fate to the steadfast simplicity of providence. The picture is enough. It may be the most consoling in the whole book. The turning is real. Seasons and fortunes really do wheel and change. And out near the rim, the swing of it can lift you high and throw you far. But the turning has a center, and the center does not turn. And nothing in your life requires you to live out on the rim. That is the geometry of the entire consolation, and one man practiced it in one narrow cell. From that height she answers his complaint about the world's shuffled fortunes, and the answer is a physician's answer. The health of the soul, she says, is righteousness, and vice is its sickness. God is the guide and physician of minds, who looks out from the high watchtower of his providence, sees what suits each nature, and gives to each what he knows to be suitable. Sweet things do not agree with every constitution, nor mild remedies with every illness. So Providence spares one man adversity, because his strength could not bear it, and it would only make him worse. Another, whole and holy, it will not suffer to be touched even by bodily disease. Another, it exercises with hardship, to confirm patience by practice and prove virtue stronger than calamity. To some it gives power, so that wickedness may be held in check. To one reckless man it allows his money, lest poverty drive him into crime. And sometimes, strangest of all, it uses the bad to make the bad good, when men who suffer injustice, inflamed against what wronged them, turn back to the ways of virtue. From the ground it all looks random, the way a pharmacy looks random to someone who cannot read the labels. The prescriptions differ because the patients do. When the hard reasoning is done, she gives him back the music she had suspended, a song in which the constellations move in a rightful league of love. Morning and evening keep their appointed sequence. The seasons hand the year along from flower to grain, to fruit to snow, and everything that lasts turns back toward the source from which it came by many roads, toward a single end. And on the far side of that song stands the conclusion the whole chapter was built to carry, so large and so calm that the prisoner himself calls it a paradox. Do you see, she asks, what follows from all we have said? That in the words of his translator, absolutely every fortune is good fortune. Every fortune, welcome or unwelcome, comes either as reward or as trial to the good, or as punishment or as amendment to the straying. Every fortune is therefore either just or useful, and in neither case is it evil. He objects mildly that ordinary speech will never allow it, for everyone says that some men's fortune is bad. She asks him only whether whatever benefits a man is good, and whether trial and amendment benefit. He cannot deny it, and the paradox stands. For all who are settled in virtue, or climbing toward it, or even just turning to look for it, everything that happens is on their side. So the wise man, she says, ought no more to resent a passage of hard fortune than a brave soldier resents the sound of the trumpet. The hour of trial is the very hour in which wisdom is perfected, and virtue takes its name from the strength that does not yield. She does not pretend the trumpet is a lullaby. She only gives the outcome back into our keeping. Hold the mean, she counsels, neither dissolved by delights nor broken by hardship. And then, in words that have steadied readers for some 15 centuries, it rests with you to make your fortune what you will. Whatever arrives is raw material, discipline for the strong, medicine for the straying, and, received rightly, never a punishment at all. With that, the fourth book of the consolation comes to rest, and the last question of all, the question of foreknowledge and the freedom of the will, can wait quietly a little longer. For now, keep only the circles. Far out somewhere is the rim, where the noise is, and the news, and the rising and falling of every restless thing. And you are not required to be out there tonight. Let the rim turn without you. Draw inward, ring by ring, breath by breath, toward the still point around which the whole sky is patiently wheeling, and settle there, as near the center as you can come. For near the center, the turning grows so slow and so gentle that it stops feeling like turning at all, and begins to feel like being held. Chapter 12. Chance and the Open Future. Somewhere in the last book of the Consolation, a man is digging in his field. It is an ordinary morning, and he intends nothing grander than to break the soil for planting, when his spade turns up a mass of buried gold, hidden there long ago by some forgotten hand. He was not looking for treasure, and the one who buried it certainly did not mean for it to be found, and yet there it lies, shining in the fresh earth. This small picture, borrowed from Aristotle, is where the final movement of the book begins, and the whole of this chapter belongs to the question it raises: whether anything in this world is truly loose, truly open, whether anything at all is left to chance. By now, Lady Philosophy has finished her great account of providence and fate, and she is ready to move on. But Boethius interrupts her. He wants to know whether there is any such thing as chance at all, and if there is, what it is. She hesitates, the way a guide hesitates at the mouth of a side path, warning him gently that digressions can tire a traveller before the journey is done. He answers that for him this is no burden at all, that learning, where it brings such delight, is itself a kind of rest. It is a lovely exchange, and you may borrow it as your own permission tonight. This chapter is a side path, and nothing along it needs to be remembered. Her first answer sounds severe. If chance means an event with no cause whatever, something sprung from pure random motion and tied to nothing that came before, then, she says roundly, there is no such thing as chance at all, and the word is only a sound. She stands on the old saying, denied by none of the ancient philosophers, that nothing comes from nothing. An event without a cause would be an event out of nowhere, and in a world where God draws all things into order, there is no unclaimed corner where such a thing could live. And yet the word is not empty, because we do use it of something real. Philosophy reaches for the definition Aristotle gave in his Physics. Whenever something is done for the sake of one end, and for particular reasons a different result follows, that is what we call chance. The farmer digs in order to plant. The man who buried the gold buried it in order to keep it hidden. Neither of them intended the finding, and yet each was acting with a definite purpose, and their two purposes happened to cross in one small patch of soil. In the words of the translation, chance is an unexpected result flowing from a concurrence of causes where the several factors had some definite end. Chance, in other words, is the name of a meeting, not the name of a gap. The find surprised the farmer. It did not surprise the world. And where do such meetings come from? They come from the same place as everything else, she says. The causes that crossed in the field each ran back along its own quiet history, and all those histories descend from the one fountain of providence, which settles everything into its appointed time and place. What we call chance is simply order seen from too close. Then she sings one of her small songs, and it is among the loveliest in the book. In the rugged Persian highlands, the song says, the Tigris and the Euphrates rise together from a single source, and part, and wander their separate ways across the plain. When their waters meet again in one deep channel, everything the two floods have carried comes together, ships and uprooted trees, driftwood knocking against driftwood, mingling in ways that no one planned. And yet the shelving of the channel and the force of the flowing water guide every floating fragment on its course. What looks most random rides upon what is most lawful. Chance herself, the song ends, is reined and bitted, and even she, the curb of law doth know. If your thoughts have already slipped into that river and gone drifting with the timbers, let them drift. The current of the argument will carry you either way, but the picture raises a tender question, and Boethius asks it at once. If even driftwood moves under law, what about us? In this long chain of linked causes, is anything left free to the will, or does fate reach all the way inward, binding even the motions of the soul? Philosophy answers without a moment's hesitation. There is freedom, she says, nor indeed can any creature be rational, unless he be endowed with free will. Whatever can reason can judge, and whatever can judge for itself what to seek and what to refuse is choosing, and choice is freedom. She adds that this freedom has degrees, like light. The divine minds see clearly and will purely. Human souls are freer when they dwell in the contemplation of the divine mind, less free when they descend into bodies, less free again when they wrap themselves in earthly appetites. And when a soul gives itself over to vice, she does not soften the word. Its condition is slavery. Freedom, in her picture, is not a stone that sits in us once and for all. It is a height, and we stand higher or lower upon it from one hour to the next. So the future is open, and we are free, on the very best authority. And it is exactly here, in the warmth of that reassurance, that Boethius sees the cliff. It seems, he says, too much of a paradox and a contradiction that God should know all things, and yet there should be free will. For if God foresees everything, and can in no way be deceived, then whatever providence foresees must come to pass, down to our hidden designs and purposes themselves. And if tomorrow could still turn aside from what God has foreseen, then his foreknowledge would be mere guessing, and to think that of God, Boethius says, would be impiety. The problem is as simple and as heavy as that. He knows the familiar escape, and he closes it honestly. Some argue that the dependence runs the other way, that God foreknows events because they are going to happen, rather than events happening because they are foreknown, so that the necessity never touches the world at all. Boethius will not take that comfort. Arguing over which is cause and which is effect, he says, misses the point, because the certainty remains whichever way the dependence runs. If you know that a man is seated, then so long as your knowledge is true, he cannot at that moment be standing. Your knowing did not press him into the chair, and yet, while it is knowledge and not error, what it holds cannot be otherwise. Just so, if God knows tomorrow, then tomorrow cannot be otherwise, whether or not the knowing causes anything. What is known is certain. That is what makes it knowledge rather than opinion. A foresight that beheld the future as merely possible, as things that may come to pass or may not, would be no foresight at all, no better than a mock prophecy that whatever is foretold will happen, or else it will not. And then he counts what the conclusion would cost, and the count is terrible. If no motion of the will is free, then rewards and punishments hang on nothing, and the justice we praise becomes the plainest injustice, since no one ever deserved anything. Virtue and vice dissolve into one undistinguished stream. Our sins trace back along the chain of causes to the author of all good, a thought he refuses even to hold, the most dreadful he can imagine. Hope loses its object, and prayer loses its sense. And hope and prayer, he says, are the one commerce left between mankind and God, the way a soul in a dark place keeps hold of the light. Take these away, and the human race comes loose from its source, and drifts, and is ruined. Philosophy hears the whole objection out to its end, and she is not alarmed. This debate, she tells him, is an old one, argued long before either of them was born, and it has defeated everyone who tried it, because human reasoning keeps measuring the divine knowledge by its own small stride. The answer will need a higher place to stand, and she knows the way up. But the climb belongs to the next hour of the night, and there is no hurry at all. You may leave the whole question in her keeping while you rest. She has carried it a long time, and it is not heavy in her hands. Chapter 13. The Eternal Present. You might picture something round, an apple on a table across the room, or a smooth wooden ball. Your eyes take in its roundness all at once, the whole curve in a single look from a distance. Your hand learns the same roundness another way entirely, slowly, in the dark, curve after curve, travelling the surface a little at a time. It is one shape known in two ways. Neither way changes the apple. Boethius sets this small observation near the turning point of his final book, and upon it, philosophy builds her answer to the hardest questions she has been asked. This chapter belongs to that answer and to the single idea inside it. She begins by granting the problem its dignity. The debate about foreknowledge is old, she says. Cicero wrestled with it in his book on divination. Boethius himself has pondered it long and earnestly, and no one has yet carried it through to a solution. The reason, she says, is that the movement of human reasoning cannot come near the simplicity of the divine foreknowledge. We keep imagining God's knowledge as if it were our own knowledge grown very large, a human forecast stretched out to infinity, and from that picture the contradiction follows at once. It is the picture that has to be given up. She loosens the knot gently first. Foreknowledge, she reminds him, would at most be a sign of what is coming, not the force that brings it about. And a sign only points at a thing, it does not make the thing. Think of charioteers, she says, guiding and turning their cars with such skill. Nothing compels those movements, or the skill would be no skill at all, and yet a watcher sees them plainly as they happen. Knowledge of things present lays no necessity upon them, so why should knowledge of things to come? But Boethius's deeper worry still stands, because knowledge must be certain, and how can there be certain knowledge of an uncertain thing? To grasp the unsure as sure looks like opinion dressed in knowledge's clothes. So she goes down to the root of the mistake. The mistake is to assume that knowledge takes all its character from the thing known, as if every mind had to receive the world in the world's own way. The truth, she says, is the very reverse. In the words of the translation, all that is known is grasped not conformably to its own efficacy, but rather conformably to the faculty of the knower. Sight knows the round shape one way and touch knows it another, and the roundness itself is not consulted about the difference. Judgment belongs to the judge. Every power of knowing does its work by its own strength and after its own manner, not by the strength of the thing it knows. Then she sets out a quiet ladder of knowers. At the bottom is bare sense, which is all that a shellfish has, fastened to its rock, knowing the world only as what touches it. Above sense is imagination, which the moving beasts possess, holding the shapes of things even in their absence, enough to seek what they want and shun what they fear. Above imagination is reason, which belongs to human beings, and which can lift the particular into the universal, seeing not only this man and that man, but what a man as such is. And above reason there is intelligence, which she reserves for the divine alone, a seeing that beholds pure form itself in a single glance. Each higher power embraces all that the lower powers hold, while the lower cannot climb to the higher. Reason knows everything sense knows, and more. The divine intelligence knows everything reason knows, and knows it more simply. If the rungs of that ladder are blurring as you listen, let them blur. You are allowed to keep only one thing from this chapter, and it is coming now, folded inside a single word. First, though, the gentle rebuke. When we declare that not even God could know free actions with certainty, we are doing, she says, exactly what sense and imagination would do if they voted down reason, denying that universals exist because their own powers cannot reach so far. In a dispute like that, we would take reason's side without a second thought. Then let reason pay the same courtesy upward. Rather than dragging the divine knowing down to reason's manner, let us rise, as far as thought can rise, toward the manner of the divine, and ask not how God could manage what we cannot, but what kind of knower God is. The word she reaches for is eternity. God is eternal. In this, she says, who reason about God agree. But eternity is not what we casually take it to be, and it is not time going and on without a rim. Her definition is the summit of the whole book, and the James translation gives it in a single sentence. Eternity is the possession of endless life whole and perfect at a single moment. Every word of that sentence is doing quiet work. Whole, because nothing of that life is missing. Perfect, because nothing of it is worn or thinned. A single moment, because none of it must be waited for, and none of it can slip away. Whatever lives in time, by contrast, lives serially, one thin now after another, a present always arriving out of a past and leaking into a future, never once holding its whole life together. In the translator's words, tomorrow's state it grasps not yet, while it has already lost yesterday's. Even today, she says, we live in no more than one brief and passing moment. And she is careful to keep the idea clean. Even a world that never began and will never end, such as Aristotle imagined the world to be, would not on that account be eternal. It would only be endless, its life stretched thin along an unending road, never gathered up. Following Plato, she says, we should call God eternal, and the world everlasting. Eternity is not a very long time. It is another manner of having life altogether, all of it at once, nothing lost, nothing pending. Now the two halves of the chapter close together like a pair of hands. Knowledge is always according to the knower, and this knower's life is a single abiding present. Then God's knowledge does not run ahead along the road of time the way our forecasts do, because for such a life there is no ahead. Everything that ever happens, what we call the past and what we call the future, is present to that gaze the way this very moment is present to you. Rightly considered, she says, in the translation's words, it is not foreknowledge as of something future, but knowledge of a moment that never passes. And that, she adds, is why the old name for it is providence rather than prevision. Not a seeing before, but a seeing over, as from a high and quiet place. And a present gaze compels nothing. Here is the release the whole night has been climbing toward. You have watched a man walking in a field while the sun was rising behind him. One glance held them both, and yet you knew the sunrise had to happen, and the walk did not, and your seeing forced neither of them. The divine vision, she says, does just that with the whole of time. It beholds necessary things as necessary, and free things as free, and confuses nothing. She grants one last subtlety, because Boethius has earned it. There are two kinds of necessity, one simple, as that all men are mortal, the other conditional, as that a man who is seen walking must be walking while he is seen. The conditional kind is real, but it adds nothing to the walker's nature and takes nothing from his will. He walks because he chose to walk, and it remains true that he might not have. Just so, whatever God sees must be as he sees it, and yet the free acts within that sight remain in themselves free. Before they happened, it was truly possible that they might never happen at all. You cannot step out of that sight, any more than you can step out of the view of someone standing quietly beside you. But the one who stands beside you holds no rope. Change your purpose, and the eternal present is not revised, because it was never behind you. In one simple glance, it holds you and your change of heart together, and its knowing flows from its own nature, not from events reporting in. Perhaps the kindest way to hold all of this, as sleep comes near, is the way a child holds the fact of a parent sitting by the bed. The gaze that rests on the child all night long makes nothing happen. It only keeps what happens company. If Boethius is right, then every hour you have lived, and every hour still on its way to you, lies inside a present like that one, seen entirely, held entirely, and entirely free. And it is safe now to close your eyes inside it. Chapter 14. The Consolation. Let us go back, one last time, to the room where all of this was made. A cell in Pavia, in the north of Italy, around the year 524. A senator of Rome, condemned by the Senate without being present to defend himself, is waiting for a death he knows is coming, and by some small light, a lamp perhaps, he is finishing a book. He has no particular reason to believe that anyone will ever read it. This final chapter is the story of what became of that book, and of what it still has to give to someone lying in the dark 15 centuries later. What he finished in that cell is the book we have been walking through all night. The Consolation of Philosophy, a dialogue in alternating prose and verse between a prisoner and the lady who came to visit him, the lady whose robe carries a little embroidered ladder rising from its hem, and whose medicine, as she promised at the start, began gentle and grew strong. In it, argument and song take turns, prose and then poetry, and then prose again, like waves coming in at night. It opens with a broken man dictating verses of grief, and with the muses of poetry sent away from his bedside. It passes through the memory of fortune and her wheel, which raises and lowers and owes nothing to anyone. It walks the false roads one by one, wealth and office and power and fame and pleasure, and finds each of them a fragment dressed up as the whole. It climbs to the one good in which all the fragments are gathered, looks steadily at the apparent strength of the wicked until that strength shows itself to be weakness, and comes to rest at the still center of the turning world, where Providence holds the spinning rim of fate. And in its last book, the one this night has ended on, it opens the strangest and gentlest thought of all, the eternal present, the single glance in which nothing is ever lost. And then it simply ends. There is no rescue in its pages, no reprieve arriving at the last hour, no farewell scene, not even a sentence to tell us that morning came. Philosophy gives her final counsel, and in the James translation it reads, "Withstand vice, practice virtue, lift up your souls to right hopes, offer humble prayers to heaven." She assures him that the freedom she has spent the whole 5th book defending is intact, that, in the translator's words, the freedom of man's will stands unshaken, and that our hopes and prayers are not poured out in vain. And then comes the last line of the whole work, the final sentence on the final page, that all our actions are done before the eyes of a judge who seeth all things. After the night we have spent together, you can hear that ending rightly. The judge who sees all things is the watcher of the previous chapter, the one whose gaze is an eternal present and whose seeing compels nothing at all. To the man writing in the cell, being seen was not a threat. It was the consolation itself. It meant that nothing he had suffered and nothing he had done was lost or unwitnessed. That the court which condemned him unheard was not the last court. That no cell, anywhere, is outside the view from that high and quiet place. The book does not end with an escape, because it was never about escape. It ends with a man setting his soul in order, in full sight of eternity, and finding that this is enough. What happened to the man, history tells plainly. The sentence was carried out around the year 524. What happened to the book, no one in that cell could have guessed. The book lived on. It was copied, and copied again, and carried from land to land, and it became one of the most copied, translated, and beloved books of the 1,000 years that followed. Beloved is the right word for it, not merely studied, but kept close, the way one keeps a letter from a wise friend. Its translators alone tell the story. King Alfred turned it into the English of his day. Geoffrey Chaucer made his own version. So did Queen Elizabeth I, a king, a poet, and a queen, each carrying the same small prison book forward into the English of their own age. And the words you have heard, quoted all through this night, the translation of H.R. James, first published in 1897, are the very words our channel reads. Why did people keep copying it, century after century? Perhaps because of where it was written. Consolation offered from a comfortable chair is easy to shrug away. This one comes up from the bottom of fortune's wheel, from a man testing every argument against the weight of his own chains and keeping nothing that would not hold. Lady Philosophy never once tells him that his losses are unreal, or that his grief is foolish. She shows him what was never his to lose, and then she shows him what no one has taken: his mind, the good that mind was made for, and the freedom with which it moves. The consolation is not a blanket drawn over the facts. It is a place to stand, nearer to the center of the circle, where the same turning world turns more slowly and matters less. That is what consolation means in this book. Not a change in the facts, but a change in the place where you stand to see them. And that may be why, after 1500 years, a book written by a man awaiting execution has become, of all unlikely things, a book that people fall asleep to. Nothing in it shouts, and no one in it hurries. Even its griefs are spoken in complete, unhurried sentences, and between the arguments there are songs. A calm voice is most believable at the worst hour, and this is a calm voice from one of the worst hours there is. If such stillness could be found in a cell in Pavia, it is not out of reach in an ordinary bedroom at the end of an ordinary day. Whatever you are carrying tonight, the wheel that raised it up and let it down is the same old wheel, and the still center is exactly as near to you as it was to him. So let us leave him where we found him, and leave him well. The lamp is low, the last page is finished, and the pen is laid down, and the prisoner, for all that is coming, is quiet. Between him and the dark sits the lady who came when everything else had gone. The night outside his window is the same night that stands outside yours now, 15 centuries older and hardly changed. He could not have known that his book would be read for 1,000 years, or that strangers in countries he never heard of would one day be soothed toward sleep by it. You are one of those strangers, the newest in a very long line, and nothing more is asked of you now, because there was never anything you were required to keep. If sleep has been gathering at the edges of these chapters, let it come all the way in. And if, on some other evening, you find that you want the whole of it, not an essay about the book, but the book itself, every argument and every song, from the first tear to the final line, the complete unabridged consolation of philosophy in this same translation is here on this channel, read slowly, waiting like a book left open on the night table. But that is for another night. This one has done its work. The wheel can turn without you until morning, and the watcher needs no help with the watching. Sleep deeply, sleep safely, and sweet dreams.